Welcome back. Did you know that 1 in 5 people have been affected by violence and sexual harassment in the workplace? And that is according to the International Labour Organization's latest report. It also revealed that half the victims worldwide never reported or even disclosed their experiences. In South Africa, over 50,000 sexual harassment offences are committed each year. Kid you not. So let's discuss the role of the employer now with Hedda Schensema, who's the Director of Employment Law at Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr. Thank you so much, Hedda, for your time this morning. I mean, reading out these statistics are even insane to think that this happens in 2022 when we're supposed to have policies in place that are supposed to govern this kind of grotesque behavior. But it looks as though it's not going away anytime soon. What is happening within our workspaces?
Good morning, Faith, and thank you for having me, and good morning to your listeners. Faith, it's a continuous change, obviously, what's happening in our workplaces, and employers are obviously obligated in terms of the code, in terms of the Employment Equity Act, as well as the Occupational Health and Safety Act, to ensure that the workplace is a safe one for us all to attend to. However, as you've already indicated in your opening address, Faith, unfortunately, these sexual offences or sexual harassment matters are continuing. Often what we find in terms of the investigations that we conduct is that employees don't feel free or safe to come forward. And that's the stress that I have to make in relation to the code, that the employers make sure that their employees are able to come forward, that they are protected when they come forward, and that disclosure by the employees remains confidential, and that they're in a safe place to do so.
It just becomes a repetition of just gross behavior. And in the instance where the employer is the perpetrator, how much more silenced are then the victims? And I would imagine that if the employer is the perpetrator, there is no appetite to take it on. And I doubt that HR can do much if the employer won't charge himself or herself.
Faith, all employers that we're aware of, obviously, and due to the awareness that is out there through the media as well as social media, our employers now have policies and procedures in place. I mean, I haven't come across any company that does not have a policy and procedure in place and a willingness to address these issues. It's going to take time, unfortunately, to address these scourges within our workplace, but that is why the employer has to implement a zero tolerance approach to this type of conduct in order to start stopping these types of inappropriate behaviors, and that employees, employers, contractors, service providers, etc., to that work environment are well aware that such conduct in their workplace will not be tolerated.
But then also there's the issue around the stigma that follows the victim. So here we're supposed to be speaking about the perpetrator, but the victim somehow gets, marked sort of with the X, that this is an individual that spoke out, and obviously then that could follow that individual within the previous workplace and even to the future workspaces that they occupy, especially if the industry is particularly small. Would you say that's also why victims are not coming forward and speaking about it, because they don't want the label of this is the person that actually outed sexual harassment at the workplace?
That's why, as I was saying earlier, Faith, one has to ensure the confidentiality. One has to ensure that the victim or the complainant in this scenario is protected, and that he or she feels safe enough to come forward, and that disclosure does not follow that person throughout his or her life, given the fact that he has now or she has now exercised her rights to be protected in the employment space, and to insist that his or her employer protects him or her during the employment relationship, and obviously subsequent wherever that person may end up being employed in future.
But how does a person actually prove sexual harassment, Hedda? I mean, it's so nuanced, right? And sometimes it's a he said, she said situation, and if it's evidence-based or evidence is required, how does one even accumulate the evidence so that you can say, no, this person harassed me, or this person psychologically traumatized me, and I want this kind of recourse? It becomes very difficult to prove, and how does one go about so?
That relies on the employer, Faith. So once I, as the complainant, let's use that as an example, have come forward to say to my employer, in terms of the grievance policy or process that is in place in the company, have come forward and said, well, I've been sexually harassed by X. The employer is then obligated to conduct an investigation. That investigation will be taken into consideration my statement as a complainant. Perhaps there is a witness. If there isn't a witness, obviously taking my statement to the perpetrator, allowing that perpetrator then to respond. An assessment has to be made in relation to whether or not there is enough substance to that complaint to then carry on with the disciplinary process subsequent to the investigation. It's often also a case in a sexual harassment type scenario, Faith, that the employee would prefer to take the informal route, instead then sit in a room together with the complainant, perhaps with HR or a mediator, to try and mediate the process between the two, because it obviously depends on the seriousness of the sexual harassment that was committed by the perpetrator. And ultimately, the company has to work together with the complainant in order to ensure that the complainant is protected. Having said that, at the same time, it can't then be a witch hunt against the perpetrator, because often what we are seeing as well is that sexual harassment is being used as a reason to try and get someone to be charged, when in often cases there is actually no substance to those claims. So the inverse is this, obviously, is to make sure that the policies and procedures in place at the company also protect the perpetrator in the event that it is a false claim.
Just in terms of being able to get some kind of recourse for it, I mean, the study that was conducted also at UNISA saying that about 51,800 cases of sexual harassment are reported in South Africa's workspaces annually. 51,000 means about plus or minus 150 a day. So though there may be policies in place, though the companies may have these set policies, but if these set policies were working and being implemented effectively, we wouldn't have a situation where we're reporting 150 or so sexual harassment claims a day in this country.
I agree with you, Faith, but we need to take it one step further as well. It's an awareness amongst us all what is an appropriate behavior and what is inappropriate behavior. So whilst the employer has the obligation to ensure a safe working place, we as the employees, we as the trade unions, the employee organizations, etc., within the workplace similarly have to work with the employer in order to ensure that it is a safe workplace for everybody.
Does that mean more education is needed, especially in these workspaces, so that people can understand what is appropriate behavior, what is inappropriate behavior? And because again, 8 or 10 hours being spent in a work environment where you are at likelihood being harassed, I can imagine how traumatizing that is for everybody concerned.
Absolutely. Training, I can't stress that enough, Faith, and it's got to be regular training. It can't be because we've just ticked the box. And I started employment on the 1st of January. I then received my induction, and in relation to that, there was a short little blurge that dealt with the sexual harassment. It's got to be ongoing. It's got to be awareness training. It's got to be, I would suggest perhaps on a yearly basis that the employees are reminded, and the employers work together with the employees to ensure that the workplace is a safe one. And if it is a unionized environment, similarly work with the unions to make sure that the workplace is safe for everybody. It's awareness and it's training, continuous. It can't be a once-off scenario, Faith.
Yeah, I definitely hear you, Hedda. We have to leave it here. But yeah, clearly something's very wrong if we're reporting over 150 cases of sexual harassment in South Africa's workspaces. It says something about safety. Hedda Schensema, much appreciated Director of Employment Law at Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr.